in the area where there is acute pain. The vast majority of people were taking HELOCs against their homes at 2%, and they were doing so in the expectation of a signing, of not even closing on their property. Everyone's a success when the water's rising.
Yeah, that was the message coming from Mark Morris, Toronto lawyer with LegalClosing.ca, who is experiencing firsthand what's going on in the Toronto condo market. I had the pleasure in speaking with Morris about what some are calling a market meltdown, discussing with Mark what's causing this meltdown, what he's seeing on the ground, and what people can do about it. We will continue to track Toronto's market on this channel. Click like and subscribe if you want to get those updates, but without further delay, let's get into this interview. All right, so today I'm joined by Mark Morris of LegalClosings.ca, a lawyer in Toronto. Mark, I just want to thank you so much for being on the show today.
Mark, I really appreciate it. Thank you for inviting me.
So let's get right into this, as I know you've spoken a bit about it. What's going on with the condo market in Toronto? Financial Post had something on their site that said market is melting down. What are you seeing?
So the market here in Toronto, and I'll speak only to the GTA and Ontario, because that's really my bailiwick and that's what I know, is really bifurcated. There's a lot of people who, when you ask, they think the sky is falling. And there's others who look at it and say it's doing just fine. And so you have to ask yourself what's going on. And what I've determined is that largely the market, on balance, is doing fine. In fact, actually, we're having, on balance, a smooth landing in the form of prices that have somewhat stabilized. They're not going up, they're not going down. Inflation is taking its toll, meaning that over the exuberance that took place in the 2020, 2021 is being taken down through inflation and not actual price reduction, which has huge effect on people who have taken mortgages, because it means that the LTV remains the same on a mortgage and mortgages aren't going underwater. And so people are largely handling that pretty well, actually. And if you look at the average person who owns real estate, things are fine. But not all is fine in Kansas. The truth is that there are acute areas of pain, severe pain taking place. And they stem from really what is the irrational exuberance of, as I said, the 2020, 2021 cycle. The condo development process is one of 5 years. What that means is the pre-con purchase takes place in 2020, say, and then it takes 5 or 6 years to construct that condo. And what that means practically is that the height of the irrational exuberance that we experienced in 2020-21, which was a direct result of the M2 money supply, the government just pumping money into the economy from COVID. It was a direct result of increasing the amount of dollars available by almost 25% in a single year. People took that money and they invested it in the only thing that they understand, because Ontarians and Canadians really only understand two things: stocks and mutual funds, or real estate. And in Ontario, we're heavily real estate focused. So where can you easily get real estate? Well, in the new build space, and a whole bunch of that money flooded into the new build space, meaning there were a whole bunch of people who purchased condos in the 2020, 2021 cycle, who then are now coming due. The bill is effectively coming due. Now, here's the thing about those people who purchased. Firstly, they purchased badly. They purchased dog crate condos, or shoebox condos, whatever the term is, which are now not de rigueur the way that they once were. People used to purchase these things because in a rising real estate market, you were able to put down a minimal amount of money as compared to larger units, and you were able to actually abscond with obscene profits through the assignment process. And so, because people had done that for the better part of 10, 15 years, more and more people went into the investment trying to find the smallest units they could, meaning putting down the least amount of money and seeing these huge returns. Those people never had any intention of closing, nor did they have the ability to close. And in any event, if they were doing an analysis of whether they can close in 2020, 21, they were doing so at a 2% interest rate, which is no longer the case, although we're coming down again. What this means is that we have tens of thousands of people who have purchased product that are no longer deemed desirable, that is to say, sub 500 square foot units, single bedrooms, in a rental market that is kind of falling in terms of price, who never had the ability to close on these things and who were using manufactured money because we now have quantitative tightening to some degree, or we did for several years. And those are the people who are now experiencing extreme pressure and acute pain. My office, if you just look at my office, you would see people who are replete, who cry every single day. We have one conversation a day of people who we do about 100 deals a month. But we have one conversation a day of people who are trying to figure out what to do. Now, that doesn't mean that we're having one failure a day. To be clear, those people who don't have intense ADHD are sitting there saying, I'm concentrating on what's coming in a year or two. And many people are having these discussions in the anticipation that they're going to be breaching. So I don't want to make it look like there's one breach a day. That's not the case. But because I do shows like this, I guess a lot of people contact me and say, hey, what can we do? And we have these discussions to some degree. So there's a lot of people who are now defaulting in and experiencing acute pain in closing on condos that are not worth what it is that they had even paid in the 2020-21 cycle. In Ontario, in Toronto, in downtown Toronto, the price per square foot is hovering roughly around $1,000 a square. At the height in Moss Park, which is, if you know Toronto, just an insanely bad area, but it's in the core of Toronto by a whole bunch of homeless shelters and everything else, but they were starting to develop it and sell. They were selling at 1,600 a square. So you have to take a 60% reduction just to get to appraised value. And here's where the math, I'm sorry, I'm speaking a lot, but giving you a good sense.
Yeah.
The problem is that builders have only taken a maximum of 20% in deposits. And so the acute pain is not only being felt necessarily amongst the purchasing class, it's also now to some degree amongst some of the smaller builders that overprice their product being felt by them because people are ready to assign and they're ready to leave their deposits on the table because the law in Ontario and across Canada, because it was a BC case that established this called Tang and Zhang, the deposits are liquidated damages no matter what when you walk away from a deal. And as a result, people know, well, the 20% I gave to the builder is gone anyway, so I'll assign and lose that. And so there's a natural 20% reduction that they're ready to take. And until about a year and a half ago, that was sufficient to get rid of their products. But now we've fallen well below that 20% mark in many of these condo products. And as a result, there's no one who's ready to buy, and the seller, the assignor, is not ready to contribute more money to this failing project. And so collectively, it's starting to become a bit of a builder problem. Now, not in any significant sense. I'm not trying to say that there's mass panic or anything else, but we do have a builder problem where the builders are seeing higher rates of default as well. And while it's all well and good to say that a builder can sue you, first of all, no mechanism that they can actually collect, but also that takes time, and the builder has an immediate need to pay back its lenders. So there's acute pain both at the purchaser side and the builders who have mispriced product and are coming to market. There's several buildings that have that there's just going to be failure rates that are higher than normal. But again, that all has to be seen in context. And the context is that the market as a whole, that's a very small segment. That's 5 to 7% of like the transacting real estate in a year. Overall, the market is fine. And those people who keep their heads and understand the larger picture are saying, listen, we're coming in for a soft landing. And then other people kind of who are acutely focused on this area are running around with their head chopped off saying the sky is falling, the sky is falling. They're not wrong, but it's not indicative of the larger trend that is all of us. It is instead indicative of a specific area in real estate. In the commercial area, it repriced almost automatically overnight. When 2023 hit, by the time 2023 hit, people who were holding land values had them reappraised 60% below almost instantly. And so the commercial owners knew what was going on. The lenders forced them to take their haircuts. Sales took place behind the scenes. It's kind of equalized, and people now have a new functional reality for what is. It's the residential where we have a 5-year lag that we're experiencing this pain cycle in. So that was a very long answer to your question, but that is the best I can give you at the present time.
No, that was great and well explained. So just to make sure I have this correct, let's say 2020, couple goes or an investor buys a condo for $1 million, puts 20% down. He's going to owe 800K on closing. He obviously can't qualify for that anymore, but up until recently, the developer could offload it for 800K. So there wasn't any real loss. But as prices are coming down, now maybe that builder can only offload it for 600K, which will induce the loss. Does that kind of the
Somewhat
meat of it?
correct.
Yeah.
Somewhat correct. Allow me to correct one singular word, which is critical. It's not
Okay.
the builder. The buyer was able to unload on the assignment
I
market.
gotcha.
They
Okay.
could self-correct. And the problem is that the assignment markets themselves have gone illiquid due to the falling prices below 20%.
Right. And but you said that this is going to be contained. This isn't something that's going to spread to the wider market. This is just a very small portion of the Toronto market.
Well, you know what the thing is about being 50, Mark? You never make
True.
prognoses about what is going to happen. I can tell you that at the present time, that seems to be the case.
Okay.
This market has
Gotcha.
the potential to surprise, and I'm
Right.
certainly not telling you where we will be. But if I'm taking a look at where we have been and where we are going, if you ask me to put money down on a guess, my guess is that we are going to dig our way out of a real estate value hole by traveling sideways for 5 to 7 years, meaning that the real estate fundamentals of cash flow analysis are coming back into the picture. And fundamentally, people are not going to be investing everything they have into a market that is going to be expected to raise 10% per year. That's not to say people aren't doing it, but as more and more people are doing this unsuccessfully, the lessons will be learned. I think what we're looking at now is a much more traditional market, similar to what we had experienced prior to 2005. For those of you who remember those times where you purchased and real estate just kind of went up at a steady 5% per year. Right now, we're just going to stay at this level for a bit. Maybe we'll start rising slightly, but we're back to traditional metrics.
You do kind of get that sense when you're out in the market that the mania has been broken, as it were. That things have changed. It's not. I kind of felt like when rates started rising in 2022, that it wouldn't take much for the mania to restart. But it does appear, at least right now, as though that's no longer the case as much.
Yeah, well, humanity is really, really, really bad at learning from. There's an expression by George Hegel that says if there's one lesson that we learn from history, it's that man does not learn from history. I mean, he said man because he's from the 16, from however many years ago. But we can just make it and say people do not learn from history. The truth is, the only if we had this embedded in our DNA, then no one would ever touch a hot stove. But the truth is that every baby has to touch a hot stove, and then they learn that the stove is hot. We had 25 years where no one had touched a stove, where every single investment you made you a genius, where suddenly Uncle Nick was the reigning king of the family because Uncle Nick made a very, very stupid decision, but came off like a bandit because a rising real estate market rises all boats. Everyone has now, many people have now had their fingers burned. And accordingly, the prudence that arises from that experience will guide us for the next 10, 15 years. You know, to some degree, Canada thought that it was really smart because it avoided 2008. If you say to a Canadian 2008, 2009, they have no idea what you're talking about. It's not in their bones. I mean, they know intellectually something happened in the States. But if you say that to someone in the States, oh my God, do they know what 2008, 2009 was? Canada was unscathed. And as a result, we just doop 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 went about our normal lives without having learned any lessons, whereas the States learned some very valuable lessons. It seems humanity, you know, I'm writing an article right now. I like to write. I'm writing an article right now on the yin and yang. And the concept of the yin and the yang, the Japanese, I don't know if you know it, but it's like the Japanese symbol that you often see on karate studios or anything else. It's the notion of chaos and order, and the idea that chaos and order are not separate events, but rather corollaries of one another that need one another and that function with one another. And the idea of order is that if you have order long enough, it springs chaos, and if you have chaos long enough, it springs order. I know this is all highly metaphysical, and your listeners don't care about any of this, but this is all to say that the yin and the yang is alive and well in real estate, and we've had order for many, 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 many years, and chaos is now upon us. And it is a corrective state to order. And after we go through it, order will again come about. It's just the natural state of things. I'm by the way, I'm sitting cross-legged and I'm hovering 2 feet above my chair. But that is what is going on. And you know, if you're asking, would there be a lesson? I think there will be a lesson because we're now heavily into order, into chaos. A lot of people have burned their finger on the stove, and I can't use any more analogies than this. Lessons have been learned, and we'll probably be the wiser for it for the next 10 years until we aren't. And we repeat this cycle, and our kids repeat this cycle, and our grandkids repeat the cycle, and welcome to humanity.
Yep. No, and I've made that point on my channel too. This happens over and over and over again in many places. That's not just Canada. It's happened in the States. It's happened throughout history, and now it's upon us.
That's exactly correct.
And it'll
And
happen
how
again.
you, by the way, people shouldn't be depressed by that.
No.
How you deal in these times defines you. Everyone's a success when the water's rising. This is the challenge. This is the challenge for professionals. This is the challenge for lawyers. This is the challenge for real estate agents and mortgage brokers. This is the challenge for investors and builders. This is the time where the metal is hardened, where we go through our crucible of fire. Wow, I'm really into analogies this morning. This is what happens when you ask for a 9 o'clock in the morning interview. My mind is, I was reading last night, and so now you have to put up with a whole bunch of Faustian analogies and everything. Okay. But anyways, you're going through the crucible of fire now, and you either emerge out the smelter in the skag, like the junk, or you emerge hardened in a beautiful form. And that's it. Because this seems to, I need you to title this thing Analogies with Mark Morris. There is a beautiful Japanese, there's a beautiful Japanese art which sees destroyed items and reconstitutes them like pottery with gold. And it's very, very obvious that they have been reconstituted with gold and meticulously repaired. And the thinking behind it is that we can make this functional again and even more beautiful than its original form. But under no circumstances do we not want to see those scars. We want to see the scars because that is what defines us. That's what makes us. And in the process, it makes us more beautiful than ever before. It's awkward to think of a market like that, but truly that is what we all go through life and through markets and through real estate investment cycles and everything else. That's what we're going through now.
Almost when forests burn down and they grow back healthier.
See, now you have to title it
See, I
Analogies with Mark and Mark, and that's what this is going to be called.
That's a good one. Well, let me ask you. So I know it's the majority of this is investors. It's not the everyday families weren't buying these shoebox condos to move into. But for anyone that is finding themselves in trouble like this, for the ones that you are seeing every day, what are the options?
Well, let me just hold off for a second.
Okay.
Because I hear that all the time. It's not families, it's investors. And in structuring a question that way, what you're effectively saying is it's some guy in China. At least that's what is intoned to your listeners. I'm not saying that that's what you were thinking, but when people think investors, particularly those people who don't think about real estate investment, they often think big money bags, some person in China, whoever else. And at certain times in the Ontario real estate cycle and the BC's real estate cycle, that was 100% the case. But actually, structurally, post-World War II, Canada made a structural decision to encourage its middle class to invest in real estate. If I choose to open up a restaurant in downtown Toronto and I go to a bank and I say, can I please have some money? They're not going to say, pay me 12%. They're just going to tell me, get out of here. We're not investing in your restaurant. If I say I'm going to establish a tech business, they'll say, get out of here. We're not giving you anything. I established a law firm with 72 employees and 13 offices, and the banks barely gave me anything, even though I was employing a multitude of Canadians and everything else. Meanwhile, if Mark Morris, who's 50 years old and can be hit by a bus crossing the street, goes into a bank and says, I'd like $2.5 million to buy a house, please, the banks will fight to the tooth, fight to the last drop to give me government rates. on my home. Now, if you do not believe that that background of money for free, money at government rates to any Canadian who wants it is not government policy that's driving investment decision, well, then come to me. I have some magic beans to sell you. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because investors are you and me. Investors are actually the middle class family. Real estate in Ontario was the way of investment, similar to stocks or mutual funds for so many middle class families. So please don't qualify it as a question of investors, not families. Investors are families. And that's the problem with the analysis. The pain will be felt broadly by the middle class that have chosen real estate investment as a structural vehicle for wealth. And that is something that is widely spread within the areas in which I operate.
So then at that point, because I think there is an idea out there that those that engaged in real estate investing could afford to do so. But from the sounds of it, are you saying that these were people that really couldn't afford to do so,
Oh,
can't afford as much
100%
to
they
take the
couldn't.
loss?
If
That's
if
what you're
that's what
saying?
people if that's what people believe, then I'm here to disabuse them of that privilege for
Okay.
sure. No, most people who were investing in these things could not afford them. They were using HELOCs on their existing house to actually place deposits. And the structurals, I'm talking about in the pain cycle. I'm talking about in that 5 to 7%. I'm not talking about the broad-based economy. We have to keep the distinction. But in the area where there is acute pain, the vast majority of people were taking HELOCs against their homes at 2%, and they were doing so in the expectation of a signing, of not even closing on their property. Closing on the properties, even if they can do so, is causing immense hardship. Now, the reason most people are closing on their properties is because real estate prices had become so insane that there was a separate phenomena that we haven't talked about here called well, it used to be drive to qualify in Ontario. That is to say, you drive outside of the suburbs until you could afford something. But it eventually became add to qualify, which is just keep on adding people until your TDS and GDS ratios were sufficient. So mom and dad and brothers and sisters were all roped into these particular agreements, meaning that defaulting, whereas other people would have said, well, I screwed up, I'm going to go bankrupt, I'm going to just let this be. Most people are no longer making these decisions because mom and dad are tied into default. And so mom and dad are now throwing money on the line as well. So even those people who are closing are doing so at immense personal and familial pain. And there are many people who simply can't and are facing the consequences of that, of course. So that's your answer. But again, restricted to the smaller space of the 5 to 7% of the people who are closing in this given year. So please keep the focus and understand this isn't mass panic. It's not sky is
Yeah.
falling. It is only for a given segment.
Only for a given segment, but it's ones that couldn't afford it. And I mean, when you speak about it like that, as though these were multiple family members, multiple generations, I'm assuming mom and dad had houses themselves, had
That's right. And
HELOCs
that's the reason
themselves.
that's the reason so many of these are still closing. It's
Yeah.
because mom and dad, upon looking at this, are saying to their kids, well, you made a bad decision. I made a bad decision signing this. So now we have to remortgage my home that I paid 50 years for to make it mortgage free. Fortunately, I bought it for three peanuts and a strawberry. So, there we go.
Yeah. Right.
And, now I'm going to have to take out a mortgage in order to afford this. So money is magically still coming, and the default rates would be much higher had we not had intergenerational signings taking place on so many of these agreements. But that is in no way to diminish the pain of investors, which are actually just Ontarians.
So let me circle back then. Is that been the main solution, the intergenerational transfers, or
That is
what do
seemingly
people
what
do?
is putting, yeah, that's seemingly what's putting the brakes on mass dissolution of the 5% to 7% of the market.
Okay.
The reason the closings are still taking place is because there are more than one person, in my view, more than one person has been roped in, more than one person has liability, and the consequences of default are stark. You already have 20% down as your sunk cost, and the potential of litigation scares a lot of people. Back to the yin and yang, people try to preserve order at all costs. Chaos will find its way in, but they try very hard to put off chaos. And so they're like, I've signed this, I'm going to move forward. And there's a whole bunch of people who adopt that approach too. So there's a bunch of people who are closing having lost money for these reasons as well. It's a smaller percentage of defaulters than would ordinarily be the case had that not been a factor in the most recent bubble.
And this goes on until 2026. That's
2026, 2027 is when we expect that to clear. So in the freehold space, we cleared that in about 2 years to 2 to 3 years because freeholds take much less time. We no longer experience this mismatch in the freehold space. We did massively in the first 2 years following 2022. But we have until about probably 2027 before we work through the 2022 hubris.
And then last question. So beyond intergenerational transfers, any options available for these for these buyers?
So yes, look, you can't come to a lawyer. First of all, I'm not suggesting a lawyer is your way out, but I can tell you the role of a lawyer in this process. A lawyer cannot advise you, even if you're pregnant and about to have a baby, to travel 101 kilometers down the highway when it's posted at 100. That's illegal. I'm not allowed to tell you to trespass. That's illegal. I'm not allowed to tell you to punch people in the face. That is illegal. Strangely, though, illegality doesn't seem to stop you from becoming the president of the United States. No, that's all I'll say about politics. I had to. It's fresh off the election. Come on, what can I say? Illegality is not something a lawyer can advise on. But there's nothing illegal about breaching a contract. Nothing at all. There's no statute that says you shall adhere to a contract. There are consequences. There are financial consequences to breaching a contract, but it's not illegal. And as a result, the job of a lawyer is to sit down with someone and say, look, here's consequence one of closing. And then we do a mathematical analysis. We say, here's your land transfer tax. Here's your adjustment costs. Here's your realtor fee when you sell. Here's your holding costs with your interest at a discount rate of, let's say, 5%. Yada, yada, yada. We do all the analysis. And we say, here's your net versus here is breaching. And here's what the law here, if you think that the value of this is this, and we're going to put in this following cushion, and here's what it looks like to breach. Now, make your decision. Do you wish to breach or do you not? And if you wish to breach, you know the consequence. You know what our expected, it's an expected loss analysis as opposed to an expected value analysis. So we've done our expected loss analysis. Now make your decision. One which has a definite outcome, the other which has variability because you can't tell how litigation will go. But if you do litigation, know that you'll have many chances to settle during the pre-trial process and everything else, and you can challenge them on damages and yada, 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 and you go through it. And so what we can do as lawyers is provide the tools of analysis that allows people to make a business decision as to whether or not to breach, which is not illegal, or to continue on with the contract. And that is the role of the lawyers now in this process and the options that buyers have. These are good options, but these are the options that present themselves and thus the options that they need to decide on.
So you know what they should be doing then? It's calling Mark Morris.
Well, honestly, I don't make any money on those types of files. That's kind of a goodwill thing. So, call any other lawyer if you want.
Anybody but Mark Morris.
There you go. Anyone but me. But look, there's also something. I've been doing this for 25 years. And the truth is, people are good to me when the times are good. And when times are bad, myself and other professionals see it as part of almost our pro bono, our civic duties. The people are in pain. It's not fun to see. There are people who are crying every single day. Like, the pain is real. I'm not trying to diminish what people are going through. And to that end, being compassionate and trying to give people a little bit of your time in basically understanding the metric is something that myself and my colleagues try to do almost as a public service, because this is our baby. The real estate market is our baby, and as it is yours. And when you see people who are in pain because they're touching the stove, you feel for them and you want to help them get through it. So to some degree, what this is really is pro bono work, and endless hours of pro bono work. And there's not much we can do beyond do what it is I set out. But that doesn't mean that that's not our charge in today's market, regardless. And that charge is what we've all agreed to take on by being professionals in this market. So here we are.
From a lawyer. That's great to hear.
Well,
All
listen,
right.
from all professionals, and it's not just myself,
Definitely.
it's you and everyone else that engages in this and is, really, with eyes
Definitely.
open.
Yep.
We try to help Ontarians. That's
Yep.
the role of professionals generally.
Yep. No, I agree 100%.
Terrific.
All right. All right, Mark, I want to thank you so much for being on the show today, and I hope everything goes well.
Mark, it was my pleasure.